Hello everybody, my name is Brandon. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here today with my July 2020 book wrap-up. So I'm going to talk about all of the books I read in the month of July, which I managed even with all the studying I was doing, as I've mentioned probably 1,000 times over the past few videos, and so I'm going to stop talking about it, I swear. But because of that, that took up a lot of my time, and so my reading kind of went to the curb a little bit, but I was still able to manage 7 books this past month, so I'm going to talk about all 7 of those, and then I'm going to talk some stats. I think I'll put the stats at the end of the video, but it's the first time I'm doing stats, and hopefully you guys are as nerdy as me and love seeing stats. I was watching another wrap-up video recently. They were using stats, and I thought to myself, of course, I love statistics. Why not use those in my wrap-up for my reading wrap-up? So that's what I'm going to do today. So I'm going to throw some stats at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that if you're interested. Otherwise, just, skip it. If you're not a nerd like me, then go ahead and skip it. But anyway, so I'm really excited to talk about these books because it was a very interesting month of reading. So without further ado, let's dive right in. The first book I finished last month was the end of a trilogy, and that is The Sixth Sense, Secrets from Beyond, Hangman. So this is book number 3, which is the final book in this odd Sixth Sense middle grade series. So I've talked about book 1 and book 2. I planned, and frankly, I still plan on doing a review of the entire trilogy, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But book number 3 is, first off, this was published in 2001, and this is a book that I read from my physical collection. But this is the weakest in the 3 books. The one I liked the least, for sure. There are, a lot of ghosts in this one, which was one of my, not even a complaint of the last book, but just something I noticed in the last book was that for a book about having the sixth sense to see ghosts, there wasn't a whole lot of ghosts, but they're back in this book here. But this one does deal a lot with bullying and things like that, but it doesn't really have much to say about it. It's just our main character being bullied and him trying to deal with that as he deals with everything else in his life. And this one was much darker because of that. Not only is he dealing with bullying, but like his mother is dealing with it at her place of employment where she works, which her place that she's worked has been talked about in every book, and it's not a place she's typically enjoyed working, but she's stuck it out because she needs to pay the bills and whatnot. But that kind of comes into the forefront here as well and plays a pretty big role in kind of the way that this book shapes up. The plot of this one is the school itself. So if you guys remember from the film, there's that scene in the school where you see the gallows, basically the people hanging from the gallows, and that's kind of what this plays on. The whole premise is that the school is basically converted from an old prison where it was like a Civil War prison, I believe it was. And so one of the ghosts of that was a person that was hanged there, is now out to try to get some answers, basically, from our main character here. So, I don't know, this one, it really didn't do it for me. There's not a whole lot to recommend here. I didn't dislike the first and second book, but this one really just kind of jumped the shark. It was completely different in tone, though it was, the same kind of material where Cole's following ghosts. It felt completely different, and because of that, I didn't enjoy it nearly as much. So I don't really recommend this one. Frankly, the whole series is probably one you can just skip, you can just bypass, because there's not a whole lot to it. But it is fascinating that this exists nonetheless. So I mean, that's cool, regardless of how good the book is. But so I'm giving The Sixth Sense, Secrets from Beyond, Hangman by David Benjamin 1.5 out of 5 stars. The second book I completed last month is one that was on my 2020 media to consume list that I made back in January, and it is one that frankly needs no introduction. It is J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. So this is just a classic of literature, period, let alone of the fantasy genre, and I totally understand why that is. But that said, this is one that I respect more than I enjoyed. So obviously I don't need to explain what The Hobbit's about, but just in case you have no idea, we are essentially following our titular character, the Hobbit, who is Bilbo Baggins, and one day the wizard Gandalf shows up at his door with all these dwarves, and he is swept away on this journey to try to steal some treasure from Smaug, who is a deadly dragon. So that's essentially what this entire story is about. Now, if you guys have been watching the channel, or, you know, even frankly something I've come to learn about myself recently, is that I much prefer a character-driven story than a world-building story. Now, that said, there are some exceptions, like the First Law trilogy, whatever the first one was called, I forget now, but that one, The Blade Itself by Joe Abercrombie, that one was definitely a world-building book, the first in that trilogy, but I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. This one, I enjoyed it. I thought it was really well done, but I wanted to know more about these characters. Like, for example, when Bilbo meets up with Gollum, that was one of my favorite scenes in the entire novel. I think it's fantastic. And it's because it is a one-on-one character scene. It's very much a character building scene. Unfortunately, we kind of brush through a lot of the moments in this book because it's such an epic story. It's going in so many different places. You know, I definitely understand why the film is broken down into a trilogy, because there's just so much here. And so I haven't yet watched any of the Hobbit films, but I hope to do that relatively soon. But I don't know. I enjoyed this. It builds an incredible world. Tolkien is a fantastic writer, no doubt about it. But I really wish we got some more of those personal, of those intimate character moments. You know, at points we jump ahead a week, 10 days, and the entire time they spent in a village, for example, is just kind of summed up in a couple paragraphs. And it's like, man, there was a lot of life that was going on there that we're missing out on. And that's a little bit unfortunate, because that's what I really enjoy. That would have meant that this, however long it is, 300-page novel would have been like 600 or 700 pages. And that isn't necessarily what I wanted either. It's just, I wish it was broken down a little bit more, I guess. So I totally respect this. I think it is a fantastically written story, but it's not one that I see myself coming back to in the future. So I'm giving The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien 3.5 out of 5 stars. So I'm going to lump these next two books in together, even though I didn't read them back to back. It was close enough. I have one book in between, which I'll talk about in just a second. But this is book 1 and book 2 of the Themis file. So we have Sleeping Giants and we have Waking Gods. And these are all written by Sylvain Neuvel. And I apologize. I guarantee I'm butchering that last name, and I am very sorry for that. But the good news is, Sylvain is a fantastic writer and has made an incredible couple of books here. So this is essentially almost like a Pacific Rim story with a whole bunch of politics and intrigue behind it. I don't know. I thoroughly enjoyed this. So Sleeping Giants, we'll start there. Basically, the opening of the book is this like 10-year-old girl falls into this pothole, and it turns out that it is this giant metal hand. And so in the first book, we are essentially trying to, are following these people as they try to assemble what is this gigantic robot. And from there, we try to figure out why it's here, who left it, what is this thing? And the first book is essentially that. And then it leads up to a climax, which is basically a cliffhanger for the second book. So I jumped right into the second book. And from there, we are jumping 10 years into the future. And the events of the first book kind of, have set the stage for what happens in book number 2. And it is fantastic. This is such an epic story, but yet there are those smaller, more intimate character moments. And really the reason I continued with this is because of those characters. I loved the relationships that were built. They felt so, they're just so interesting. They felt so genuine. There is a character who is essentially kind of like, I don't even know what to call him. He's basically like works for, or has blackmail on virtually everybody in power. And so anything he wants, he gets. And he starts off as such just a despicable character, but damn if he didn't grow on me as the series continued. And I love that. We are introduced back to that girl who fell on the hand when she was 10 years old. She is now a scientist that is trying to study and help discover the rest of these pieces in book 1. And it is just so cool. So my problem is I don't want to give any spoilers. So I've actually completed this trilogy already, but I'm not going to talk about book number 3 today. I'm going to talk about that in my August wrap up because I didn't read that in July. So if you like anything like Pacific Rim, if you like even the Hunger Games, which this is not a Hunger Games story, but as the series continues, you get a lot more of the political play that you do get a little bit of in the Hunger Games. So if you enjoy stories like that, I definitely recommend this one. So this one I did, both of these I did via audiobook, and that is the way to read this. This is a mixed media story. So it is told through interviews, through journal entries, through newscasts, things like that. And so the audiobook is actually a full cast, and they do a wonderful job of delivering this story. This was a sci-fi epic that kind of hit me out of nowhere. I had no idea what to expect coming into this, and I was just blown away by it. I really, really liked this story. So thank you to another booktuber I follow, Reading Revelations. I will link her channel down below. She actually talked about this in one of her wrap-ups, I believe it was, and so I checked on Libby, which is where I borrowed these, and it was available. So I took a chance on it, and absolutely loved it. So glad I've read this story now. So I am giving Sleeping Giants book number 1 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I'm giving Waking Gods 4 out of 5 stars. Not that Waking Gods is notably worse by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that book number 1 was just so out of left field and just so kind of every single moment was like, what's going to happen next? That I enjoyed that one just a touch more than I enjoyed the second book, but still, they are both fantastic. So definitely recommend these two if you are interested in the sci-fi genre, or if what I've talked about sounds interesting at all. And I am being purposely vague, so I apologize. This is kind of a poor review of it, but I don't want to give any spoilers. And frankly, I don't know specifically what was in book 1 and what was in book 2 and what was in book 3. So I don't want to talk about anything too in detail for fear of giving a spoiler without even realizing it. So check these books out. They are fantastic. Next up is a fantasy book that I've been wanting to read for some time now, and that is Jim Butcher's Stormfront. So this is book number 1 of the Dresden Files, which frankly I knew virtually nothing about coming into it other than it was a fantasy story. And things I've read about it, it didn't really sound like something I would love, but I was still interested in checking it out just because it is such a well-known and popular series. Stormfront is the story of Harry Dresden, who is our main character, and he is a professional wizard. So, you know, he basically acts as a sort of private eye most of the time, but also the police will call him whenever there is something supernatural that they think a wizard might be able to help with. So this first book is the police call on him because there is a crime that is very clearly supernatural. Something odd has happened here. And then also we're following kind of his private eye business. A woman calls him who's worried about his husband. She is afraid that something's going to happen to him, essentially. And that's essentially the plot of the first book, which sounds very basic, but Jim Butcher does such an incredible job of world building here along with building these characters that it is fascinating. I loved some of the just unique and interesting people that we meet along the way. They really make the story for me. The whole like the mystery of the book kind of lost momentum for me a little bit as the story went on. But honestly, I feel like that's more my fault than the book's fault or Butcher's fault, because I was doing this via audiobook and I took like a few day break because I was not driving anymore for a few days, and so I wasn't listening. And I think I kind of lost the momentum that was built up the first kind of half of the book for me. So it kind of lost a little steam as the story went on. But that said, I still think it is a very interesting world that's created here, and one that I can definitely see myself continuing on in. I think the Dresden Files is something that I will definitely enjoy the more I get into it. So I am giving Stormfront by Jim Butcher 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up was one that was on my 5-star prediction list at the beginning of the year, and that is I Am Legend, written by Richard Matheson. So this is one that as you I have the movie cover version of this, and this is one of my favorite films. I absolutely love this movie, and I know it's not perfect, but I just love it so much. I think Will Smith is fantastic in it. You have the incredible dog. It is such a fun movie. So I was super excited to read this one because not only do I love I Am Legend, but I really enjoyed The Omega Man with Charlton Heston, and I really enjoyed The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. And so I just like this story a lot. I mean, it reminds me like of the opening of 28 Days Later always reminds me of I Am Legend as well. But anyway, total tangent with that last one. But so this is one that I've been wanting to read for so long just because I've liked the movie so much. And while I'm definitely glad I read it, unfortunately it was not a 5-star book for me. So I Am Legend tells the story of Robert Neville as he is essentially trying to survive being one of the last people left on Earth. And there are these vampire-like creatures that are out to get him. And so we follow his story as he tries to survive. And that's essentially what this is about. That's what all the films are about as well, for the most part. Obviously, there are big differences between the 3 films and between the book, but that's essentially what we're getting here. So I think my biggest surprise about the book is the fact that Robert Neville is not a scientist in the book, and I think he's a scientist in like all 3 of the movies I've seen that were adapting this. So that was really surprising to me, and unfortunately it kind of leads to my biggest gripe with the book, is that we spend so much time following him, essentially trying to become a scientist or trying to learn what the scientists might want to learn in a situation like this. And so we get a lot of science here, which is not really what I'm watching I Am Legend for. Is it interesting in tiny bits? Sure, but you get quite a bit of it here. I think the characters that are introduced here are really, really cool. Like, if you've seen any of the movies, you'll probably understand what I'm talking about, with like these vampire-like characters. I think their story is really interesting because they have some memory, potentially, of who they used to be, at least in the book, and I think that's really interesting. We do spend a lot of time with Neville's character trying to attract this dog, which is really interesting because obviously in this movie, he's with him from the beginning, but we spend a lot of time with it here, and this book is not long at all. I think so this whole book is I Am Legend and Other Stories, and I Am Legend ends at page 159. So it is a very short novel, but we spend probably a quarter of it with him trying to attract this dog, which, I mean, makes sense. He is completely alone. So the fact that he could potentially have a companion makes sense that, that's important to him. And so it should be important to the story. The other thing that's really interesting here is that this book jumps ahead in time quite a bit. I forget exactly how many years, but I think it's like 3 to 5 years passes, maybe 3, during the duration of this book, which I thought was really interesting. I don't know. I liked it, but I kind of wanted more of the struggle with the vampire-like creatures than we get. We get more science here, and we get more just him dealing with the loneliness, which I enjoy, but I think it's handled better in the film. The ending for this is also just notably different than any of the films that at least that I recall offhand. And I finally understand where the title I Am Legend comes from. So I'm so happy that that's now clear to me. So, I don't really have any major problems with this book. I enjoyed it. I think it's well written. I just didn't love it as much as I was hoping I would, obviously putting it as a 5-star prediction. So I'm giving Richard Matheson's I Am Legend 3.5 out of 5 stars, which is just a popular rating for me this past month. The last book I read was actually a graphic novel, and this is one that was adapted into a film that I watched last month, which was why I decided to read this graphic novel. So we have Ghost World, written by Daniel Close. So I know that most of you will have either read this book or have seen the film, and I only was introduced to both of these last month. So I'll talk about the movie in my media wrap-up, but the book, I actually I read after I watched the film, and honestly, I'm really glad I did, because if I had read this first, I don't think I would have jumped on the film quite as quickly. So one of the most interesting things here is the art style that Daniel Close uses. He uses this green, black, and white style throughout the entire graphic novel. And it seems weird at first, but it works really well. There's a lot of detail in his artwork, and it looks really good. So that's probably my favorite aspect of this. This story itself is essentially just a coming-of-age tale. We are following these two girls who have recently graduated from high school, and they're trying to find out what comes next. What does life after high school look like? In the graphic novel, these are not very likable characters, not very likable people, which I don't have to have likable people. I don't have to read about likable people all the time, but there's not much else to cling on to here, because that's really what the story is about, are these two girls and what will they do next. Not only are the two girls unlikable, but there are just some despicable characters throughout this graphic novel that they really tone down in the film, and honestly, I think it's for the better. The story itself is actually notably different than the movie. It goes in a completely different direction. Some of the characters that are introduced in the film as like main players are barely even touched on here. They share a lot of similar ideas and very similar themes, but it's just done so much better in the movie, which again I'll talk about in my next video. But I'm just very glad that I watched the film first, because I didn't love this graphic novel. I think it's fine. It's probably good, but it's one I'm very glad I didn't spend money on. I'm glad that I got it from the library. So I'm giving Ghost World by Daniel Close 3 out of 5 stars. Okay, so now let's talk some stats. So I'm going to throw some images on the screen here as I'm talking, but in terms of format, so how I read these books, I had 2 physical books that I read this past month and 5 audiobooks. For the intended audience of these books, I had 1 middle grade, 1 young adult, and 5 adult books. Talking genre, I had 1 fiction and 1 mystery, and then 2 fantasy and 3 sci-fi. So no horror this month, which is fascinating to me because I feel like I always read horror. And frankly, in my spreadsheet, I just put like the main genre. And so I Am Legend could probably be sci-fi horror if I really wanted, but I only picked 1. And so I picked sci-fi for that. And then, everything else kind of fit snugly in. Fiction is just what I use for, Ghost World. I don't really know what genre to put it in. So I find fiction works just fine there. So that's my breakdown of genre. So let's talk page count. So this is an interesting one to me. So for audiobooks, in order to get my total pages read number, I will I'll just basically look on Goodreads, and whatever the most popular edition of the book is, I'll use whatever that page count is as my page count number. So my total page count, including all of the audiobooks I read, if I read them in physical form, they would equal this, comes out to 1,850 pages in the month of July. And those 1,850 pages of book would mean that each book I read was an average of about 264 pages. And it also means that I read an average of about 60 pages every day in the month of July. My total listening time for audiobooks, so this is specifically to the audiobooks. I don't add in a time for my physical books at all. But my total audiobook listening time this month was 41 hours and 56 minutes. Now that said, keep in mind, I do listen to my audiobooks on usually 1.7, 1.75, or if it's very difficult to understand, I go down to 1.5. So, the total time I actually spent reading these was lower than that, but you get the idea. So I spent 41 hours and 56 minutes listening to audiobooks last month. And now just some miscellaneous stats here at the end. So for my average rating for July 2020 was 3.36 stars out of 5, which frankly makes sense because I had so many books that I rated 3.5 stars. My highest rated book was Sleeping Giants at 4.5, and my lowest rated book was The Sixth Sense, Secrets from Beyond Hangman with a 1.5 score. And then finally, I do keep track of how many days it takes me to read each book. And so on average last month, it took me about 5.71 days to complete each of the books that I finished last month. Hopefully you guys like those stats. I know I went through them super fast, but the video ended up being a little bit longer than I expected, so I wanted to kind of get through those. But let me know if there's any other statistics you would like me to talk about. I am such a huge nerd. I love spreadsheets, and I love taking statistics, so I figured I might as well include them in the video, just in case there are other nerds like me out there. So if you want to know any other specific statistics, please leave those down in the comments below. I would love to take suggestions for stats. All right, so that is going to do it for my July 2020 book wrap-up. So 7 books last month, which all things considered, I am very happy with. I think it was a very interesting month of reading. I got some classics in there and some, maybe a dud or two, but that's all right. So let me know down in the comments below, what did you read last month? Anything good? Anything worth talking about? Something I should avoid? Let me know that down in the comment section below. I would love to have more of a conversation with you guys down there. As always, if you guys enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Cinefessions here on YouTube. And if not, thank you anyway for watching this video. I really do appreciate that. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for today. I just want to say thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.